Iran has spent over a decade building what it calls one of the most formidable air defense networks in the Middle East. Billions of dollars. Russian-supplied missile batteries, domestically engineered radar systems, layer upon layer of detection, tracking, and interception, designed to make any attacker pay an unbearable price for entering Iranian airspace or threatening its assets. On paper, it looked like a fortress. In practice, according to emerging reports, a single coordinated operation reportedly walked right through it. No prolonged air campaign, no weeks of softening. Reports suggest that U.S. and Israeli forces launched a joint strike targeting Iranian proxy infrastructure and weapons supply lines, and that Iranian air defenses failed to mount any meaningful response before it was already over. This isn't a story about one night of explosions. This is a story about whether Iran's entire defensive architecture has a structural flaw that no amount of hardware can fix. And if these reports hold, the strategic balance across the Middle East may have shifted in ways that Tehran is only beginning to understand. If you follow military strategy, defense technology, and the power struggles shaping the modern world, subscribe to the channel and drop your take in the comments. Let's start with what defense analysts and open-source intelligence trackers are describing. Reports suggest a coordinated U.S.-Israeli strike package targeted Iranian proxy infrastructure and weapons supply corridors in Syria, with some analysts indicating that the operation may have extended to assets linked to Iranian territory itself. This was not a unilateral Israeli sortie with quiet American approval in the background. According to multiple defense commentators, this was a jointly planned, jointly executed operation, a distinction that carries enormous weight, and one we'll come back to. The reported strike composition involved stealth aircraft, cruise missiles launched from multiple platforms, and advanced electronic warfare capabilities operating in concert across the battlespace. The targets were not random. They were deliberate, sequenced, and struck within a compressed timeline that reportedly left Iranian-linked air defense operators struggling to distinguish real threats from electronic ghosts flooding their screens. Some defense analysts describe the operation as one of the most tightly coordinated joint strike packages seen in the region in years. Others are more cautious, waiting for satellite imagery and independent verification. But what nearly every analyst agrees on is this: whatever happened, Iran did not stop it. But the weapons used are only half the story. What matters more is what happened before a single missile was launched. Modern warfare doesn't begin with an explosion. It begins with silence. And according to analysts tracking this operation, the first phase wasn't kinetic at all. It was electromagnetic. Before any cruise missile reached its target, reports suggest the operation opened with an intensive electronic warfare campaign designed to blind, confuse, and paralyze Iranian-linked air defense systems across the strike corridor. This is what military planners call SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses, and when executed at the highest level, it doesn't just jam a radar, it dismantles an entire network's ability to function coherently. What does that look like in practice? Radar frequencies get flooded with noise. Missile guidance systems receive spoofed signals, tracking targets that don't exist. Command and control data links between detection radars, fire control systems, and missile batteries get degraded or severed entirely. Operators stare at screens filled with false contacts and conflicting data, unable to determine which tracks are real threats and which are electronic phantoms. By the time the actual strike platforms arrive, the defense network isn't destroyed. It's functionally paralyzed. The hardware is still standing, the radars are still spinning, but the system as a whole has lost its ability to see, decide, and act within the time frame that matters. Analysts point to known U.S. capabilities: the EA-18G Growler, a dedicated electronic attack aircraft with a long operational pedigree, and Israeli electronic warfare systems that have been refined through years of operations over Syria and Lebanon. Some experts also suggest that cyber operations may have played a supporting role, though this remains speculative and unconfirmed. What isn't speculative is the outcome. Iran's air defenses, according to available reporting, did not engage the strike package effectively. The defensive network didn't fail because it was obliterated first. It reportedly failed because it was neutralized before the operators understood what was happening. Which raises an uncomfortable question for Tehran. If their air defenses couldn't see this coming, What exactly have they been building for the last decade? Iran has invested heavily in projecting an image of air defense strength. The Russian-supplied S-300 PMU-2 forms the backbone of its long-range capability. The domestically developed Bavar 373, often showcased as Iran's answer to the S-300, or even the S-400, is presented as proof that Iran can build world-class defense systems independently. The Khordad-15, the third of Khordad, and various short and medium-range systems fill in the layers below. On paper, this is a comprehensive, integrated air defense network. Multiple engagement envelopes, overlapping coverage zones, redundant detection systems. But defense analysts have been quietly raising concerns about this network for years. The issues aren't about any single system, they're systemic. First, integration. Russian-made systems and Iranian-made systems don't always communicate seamlessly. Data formats differ. Command protocols differ. Merging them into a truly unified network where every sensor feeds every shooter in real time is an engineering and doctrinal challenge that even advanced militaries struggle with. Second, training. Sophisticated hardware requires sustained, high-level operator training. Sanctions have limited Iran's ability to conduct large-scale joint exercises with external partners, and some analysts question whether Iranian crews have enough realistic training hours against the kind of electronic warfare environment they'd face in an actual peer-level conflict. Third, maintenance. Sanctions have also constrained access to spare parts and technical support, particularly for the Russian-supplied systems. Degraded maintenance means degraded reliability, and in air defense, a system that works 90% of the time is a system that can fail at the worst possible moment. Fourth, and perhaps most critically, real-world testing. Iran's air defense network has never been stressed against a full-spectrum electronic warfare attack from a peer-level adversary. Until now. Critics point to a pattern. In April 2024, Iran launched a large-scale missile and drone barrage against Israel. The overwhelming majority of those projectiles were intercepted. The operation, intended as a show of force, instead exposed the limitations of Iran's offensive reach. Now, reports suggest, the defensive side of the equation has been exposed as well. If this changes how you think about air defense in modern warfare, hit like, and let me know below whether you think Iran can actually close this gap. But neutralizing air defenses is just the opening move. What matters next is what you choose to hit, and the target set in this operation tells a very specific story. There's a reason the reported targets weren't nuclear facilities or government buildings. Those would be dramatic. They dominate headlines for weeks. But strategically, what was reportedly struck may be far more consequential. Iran doesn't project power through its conventional military. Its army, navy, and air force are not designed to fight expeditionary wars across the region. Instead, Iran's strategic reach depends on a sprawling network of proxies: Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iranian-aligned militias in Iraq, Houthi-linked operations in Yemen, and IRGC coordination hubs embedded throughout Syria. These groups don't sustain themselves. They require a constant flow of weapons, missile components, communications equipment, funding, advisors, and logistical support. That flow moves through a corridor, from Iran, through Iraq, into Syria, and onward into Lebanon. This is the arterial network of Iranian regional power. And according to reports, this is precisely what the joint operation targeted: weapons storage facilities along the corridor, transfer points where components change hands, logistics hubs used by the IRGC to coordinate supply movements, missile component staging areas. This isn't decapitation strategy, it's attrition. The goal isn't a single knockout blow that collapses the Iranian government or triggers regime change. The goal is to sever the connective tissue that allows Iran to sustain its proxy forces over time. Destroy enough nodes in the supply chain, and the network doesn't collapse overnight. It degrades, slowly, persistently. Shipments arrive incomplete. Replacement parts don't arrive at all. Coordination breaks down. Proxy forces that depend on Iranian logistics find themselves operating with diminished capacity, unable to replenish what they expend. Some defense strategists describe this as the most effective approach available, more damaging to Iran's long-term power projection than any single spectacular strike on a high-profile target. Others warn that supply networks can be rebuilt, rerouted, and reconstituted. The question is whether the pace of disruption outstrips the pace of reconstruction. And this is where the operation reveals something bigger than a single night of strikes. Because Israel has done this before, alone. The difference this time is who was standing next to them. For years, Israel has conducted what military analysts call the campaign between wars, a sustained series of airstrikes against Iranian assets and weapons shipments in Syria, carried out unilaterally. The United States provided diplomatic cover, shared intelligence, and maintained the broader strategic framework. But the strikes themselves were Israeli operations, planned and executed by Israel. If this operation was genuinely joint, shared planning cells, coordinated strike packages, synchronized electronic warfare, unified command, that represents something qualitatively different. This isn't a patron quietly supporting a client. This is two military forces operating as a single instrument. The signal that sends is enormous. It tells Tehran that the United States is willing to move beyond diplomatic shielding and intelligence sharing into direct operational partnership against Iranian assets. It demonstrates a level of interoperability between U.S. and Israeli forces that allows complex, multi-domain operations to be executed seamlessly across stealth aviation, cruise missile strikes, and electronic warfare simultaneously. And it signals that political will exists, at least at this moment, to accept the risks that come with direct military action against Iranian infrastructure. But there's a tension buried inside this signal. Joint operations also mean shared escalation risk. When Israel strikes alone, Iran can calibrate its response against a single adversary. When the United States is operationally embedded in the strike, any Iranian retaliation must account for the possibility of an American counter-response. That raises the stakes for Iran, but it also raises the stakes for Washington. If Iran retaliates against U.S. assets in the region, does the United States get pulled deeper into a Middle Eastern confrontation it has spent years trying to step back from? Does a single joint operation become the first link in an escalation chain that neither side fully controls? Subscribe if you want to keep tracking how the U.S.-Israel alliance is evolving, because this may be just the beginning. So Iran's defenses were reportedly bypassed, its supply lines hit, and its chief adversaries operated as a unified force. Now comes the hardest question. What can Tehran actually do about it? Iran is now trapped inside a strategic calculus where every available response carries significant risk. Direct military retaliation is the most visible option and the most dangerous for Tehran. Iran's April 2024 barrage against Israel was intended to demonstrate that Iran could strike the Israeli homeland directly. Instead, the vast majority of missiles and drones were intercepted, and the operation exposed the ceiling of Iran's conventional offensive capability. A repeat attempt would likely face the same layered interception, potentially with even more robust defenses in place, while inviting a devastating counterstrike that Iran has already proven it cannot defend against. Proxy retaliation offers a degree of deniability, but the proxy network itself is under strain. Hezbollah has been significantly degraded following the 2024 conflict. Iraqi militias risk provoking a direct American military response if they target U.S. forces. Houthi operations in the Red Sea are already under sustained coalition pressure. The proxies remain capable of causing damage, but their capacity to deliver a response proportional to the reported strike is questionable. Asymmetric or cyber operations are possible. Iran has demonstrated cyber capabilities in the past, targeting infrastructure and financial systems. But cyber retaliation, while painful, is unlikely to restore the deterrence that has been visibly eroded. It doesn't change the military equation. And then there's the option that keeps intelligence analysts up at night: accelerating the nuclear program. Some defense experts warn that this is the paradox embedded in every military strike against Iran. Each successful operation degrades Iran's conventional and proxy deterrence. And as conventional deterrence weakens, the strategic incentive to pursue a nuclear deterrent grows stronger. If Iranian leadership concludes that no amount of air defense, no network of proxies, and no conventional missile arsenal can prevent strikes like this, the logic of nuclear acquisition becomes harder to argue against internally. This is the deterrence trap. Iran's conventional posture has been visibly weakened. Responding risks further exposure. Not responding risks establishing a precedent that such operations can be conducted without consequence. And the most dangerous response of all, the nuclear path, is precisely the outcome the strikes are ostensibly designed to prevent. Comment below. Do you think this strengthens U.S. influence in the Middle East, or does it create more instability long-term? But Iran's response isn't the only reaction that matters, because when the U.S. and Israel act together at this level, the rest of the world is watching and recalculating. Russia is nominally Iran's strategic partner, but it is deeply consumed by the war in Ukraine. Moscow's ability to provide meaningful, immediate military support to Tehran is constrained. Its own defense industry is stretched, its diplomatic bandwidth is limited, and its military assets are committed elsewhere. However, this operation may push Russia to accelerate certain transfers: more advanced air defense components, electronic warfare countermeasures, technical advisory support. Shoring up Iran serves Russia's broader interest in maintaining a counterweight to U.S. power in the Middle East, even if Moscow can't directly intervene. China watches from a different angle. Iran is a significant energy supplier and a piece of Beijing's larger strategy to build influence across the Middle East and Central Asia. China will not intervene militarily. That's outside Beijing's strategic playbook entirely. But diplomatic support may increase. Economic partnerships may deepen, and China may position itself as a stabilizing voice, contrasting its approach with what it frames as American military interventionism. For Beijing, every U.S. military commitment in the Middle East is a resource not committed to the Indo-Pacific. Gulf states are recalculating quietly. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others have spent recent years hedging, building relationships with both Washington and Beijing, pursuing normalization with Israel while maintaining channels to Tehran. A demonstrated U.S. willingness to act militarily may temporarily reinforce the value of the American security partnership, but it also raises the specter of regional escalation that Gulf capitals want to avoid. Stability and energy flows matter more than any alliance commitment. Turkey and Iraq face direct operational consequences. Logistics corridors cross their territory and borders. Both governments face pressure from multiple directions: domestic politics, Iranian influence, American expectations, and their own strategic calculations. This is why a single strike operation in Syria reverberates far beyond the blast radius. It forces every significant power in the region and beyond to reassess its assumptions about what the U.S.-Israel alliance is willing to do, and what the consequences of that willingness might be. And that brings us to the question no one in Washington, Jerusalem, or Tehran can fully answer yet. Two paths extend from this moment, and both are entirely plausible. In the first scenario, the operation works as intended. The demonstration of overwhelming, coordinated capability convinces Tehran that further provocation through proxy networks will be met with precise, devastating, and unpredictable strikes that its defenses cannot counter. Iran, unable to respond effectively, is forced into a posture of strategic restraint. Proxy supply lines degrade over time. Diplomatic backchannels quietly reopen. The operation becomes a precedent, a model for calibrated, joint military action that contains Iranian power projection without triggering full-scale war. In the second scenario, the operation triggers exactly the escalation it was designed to prevent. Iran, humiliated and strategically cornered, concludes that its only path to genuine deterrence is a nuclear capability. Development accelerates behind hardened facilities and layers of denial. Proxies, though degraded, launch retaliatory operations that inflict enough damage to force a response. The U.S. is drawn deeper into a regional confrontation. Alliance politics fracture under the strain. The Middle East enters a period of sustained instability that reshapes energy markets, refugee flows, and great power competition for a generation. The uncomfortable truth is that the outcome may depend on decisions that haven't been made yet. In Tehran, in Washington, in Jerusalem, and in capitals from Moscow to Beijing to Riyadh. The strike has been conducted. The defenses have reportedly failed. The supply lines are burning. But military operations don't exist in isolation. They create consequences that unfold over months and years, shaped by politics, miscalculation, domestic pressure, and the unpredictable behavior of leaders under stress. The next 12 to 24 months will determine whether this was a turning point toward a more stable regional order, or the opening chapter of a much larger confrontation. The missiles have landed. The defenses failed. The supply corridors have been struck. But the hardest part of any military operation isn't the strike itself, it's what comes after. Capability has been demonstrated. Vulnerability has been exposed. Alliances have been tested, and for now, strengthened. But the strategic chessboard is still in motion, and every player is recalculating their next move. The question isn't whether this operation succeeded on a single night. The question is whether it leads to restraint, or to something far more dangerous. And right now, no one has the answer to that. If you want more deep analysis on military power, defense strategy, and the global shifts shaping our future, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share your perspective in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.